The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
We're looking from the outside. What does the curb say about your place? We're talking tips you may want to know. Stay with us. You're watching Garden Connections. Welcome to Garden Connections. I'm Vicki Langrell. Thank you for joining us. I'm happy to introduce Randy and Tom, who are here to help us understand curb appeal. Call in and ask your questions. The number's there at the bottom of your screen. Randy, let's start with you. What improves curb appeal?
That's a very good question, Vicki. A number of things can really improve curb appeal: plants, hardscape or walkways, and so on. But let's talk about what curb appeal is and where it came from. I believe it was coined by realtors as they would approach a home that was for sale with people that had never seen it before. They witnessed a reaction. People would come to a home for the first time and they would take a look and they would have an immediate feel whether the home was inviting, whether it was pleasing, or whether they weren't really sure if they wanted to go in or not. So curb appeal kind of evolved from that arena, and now with Home and Garden TV and so on, it's become very, very popular to improve your curb appeal, so to speak. And there's a number of ways to do that. Some are expensive, some are not.
It doesn't really matter the size of your yard. It could be just a tiny yard or, you know, a huge yard. Just the smallest thing can make a huge difference. As far as making changes to your yard, what's the most efficient, say, cheapest way to make the biggest impact? Tom?
Well, you know, the easiest ways are probably the ways that require more of your labor. You know, assuming that your labor is free. There's a lot of things you can do. Some of it's maybe just maintenance, keeping stuff that you have trimmed up, maybe keeping the lawn mowed, maybe, you know, fertilizing the lawn just to green things up, just to give it a little more, just kind of a well-maintained look. Doesn't necessarily have to be a lot of stuff out there, just some nice stuff that's well-maintained.
What do you think the incentive is to spruce up your yard?
Well, I think everybody likes to feel like their home. It just gives kind of a homey feeling, as well as when you invite people over or people drive by. You know, it's kind of cool when people go, or maybe slow down when they go by your house, or say, oh yeah, I noticed that you added this, or boy, that really looks good, or what's that growing, or how'd you do that? We just kind of like that when people like what we have, or just kind of human nature, like to impress people a little bit.
Right, yeah. And then there's also that incentive of adding thousands of dollars, you know, sometimes to the home's value by just simple things we can do. When's it a good time to get started on fixing up the front yard?
In Minnesota, I would say any time that we're able to get outside and work. This year's been a little bit of a challenge. The weather hasn't been so great. But honestly, you can do a tremendous amount from very, very early in the spring through the entire summer, well into the fall. And you really need to start just by kind of assessing what you have, taking a very objective look at your home, your walkways, the front of your house, your doors, your windows, the color of your home, and of course the condition of your plants, your trees, your shrubs, and so on. Sometimes, as Tom mentioned, less is more. Not having overgrown plants or plants that need trimming. Take a real close look at that. We often walk past these things day in and day out, but yet we don't really see them as others do. So sometimes you need to invite someone else to take a peek at the home.
Get a more objective.
Correct.
Yeah. Let's just start with some of the easiest things to do in the front yard, not the backyard this time, front yard. Plants, flowers, shrubs.
You know, the easiest thing that comes to mind to me is just taking like a shepherd's hook, sticking it in the front yard, and put some hanging baskets on there, and then you've just added color in 5 minutes. And it's relatively inexpensive to do it that way. The negative thing, and one thing you have to think about is then that's just for this year. That's only going to last this summer, and then it's going to fade off. Do something next year. Whereas you plant something that's a shrub or a perennial flower, it's going to be permanent. Which, if you like it, is maybe a good thing. If you don't like it, then you have to know that it's there until you cut it out.
Randy, what's a good place to get inspiration for what you like or what will work in your yard?
We've already mentioned Home and Garden TV. The only thing there is many of the projects may be unrealistic for people. But garden magazines, standing in the checkout at the supermarket, there's many very good garden magazines. You can also invite a landscape designer to your home. Oftentimes the first visit, there's no fee. They'll come out and do an assessment or give you some pointers or so on. The other thing would be friends and neighbors, places you've been to that you have found attractive. Great inspiration. You can take a look and say, I really like what their front looks like. I want to make ours similar or simplify it. So you just have to look around and kind of get a flavor of what you'd like.
What are some things? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the nice thing about that, looking around, is if you see something in a surrounding area or town or neighborhood, you know that it does well here.
Right.
If you go on vacation to Florida and you see a house and you go, boy, I really like that, it's probably not likely that you're going to duplicate it here.
Yeah.
So you want to have realistic expectations that way, too, of what can actually grow in Minnesota.
And Tom, if you notice that gardeners are pretty generous. I mean, they're friendly people, and they like to share.
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of times you'll see garden tours in the summertime. People that actually have, invite you into their garden to take a look at different things and different ideas they have. And the other thing I think you have to realize is these big gardens, like you see on Home and Garden TV, they can do it in 3 days, but a lot of places that you see around here, it's maybe been 15 years that they've been working on this garden and just adding a little bit and a little bit.
What are some fast rules for foolproof landscaping or the composition of how you'd set it up? Is there a set of rules for how you might?
Typically, you would like to focus your color on your entryway. You don't want to have color from one end of the house to the other because it becomes too visually confusing. So if you can focus color through pots or maybe flower borders, or as Tom mentioned, a shepherd's hook with hanging baskets, something like that, near the area you want people to approach when they come. Sometimes that's confusing. I don't know if you've been to homes. Often we go to a number of homes through the business, and we will approach a home that we've never been to, and sometimes we're confused at which door to go to. And that has to do with lack of color or narrow walkways or something like that. So you want to designate where do you want your friends and visitors to come.
That's a good point. So, we really do. When we walk up to a house, you get a feel, an instant feel. And I remember from a real estate instructor once, they said, if people don't like what they see on the outside, they're not going to come in. You might have the most magnificent house on the inside, but if they don't feel welcomed or feel good when they walk up, And there's simple things we can do, like paint the front door, like the front door is important. What about the other types of hardware, or what do you call it, like the address, mailbox, things like that?
Sometimes I think the gutter is a big thing too. You have a leaky gutter, sometimes it's hanging off a little bit, and it just gives you the approach that the house is falling apart, which really probably isn't, but that's how it looks from the outside.
By visiting a home center, you can see all kinds of different styles and types of front doors. And it's funny how once you develop a theme with the hardware to your front door, then there's matching numbers for the front of the house, and then maybe a mailbox, and all of these things can tie together either with color or style. You can even use yard lights and so on to light the way, so when people come at dusk or in the evening, they're able to see clearly where to go.
Randy, that's a good segue to the next question I was going to ask about lighting. What are some things that we can do to highlight our yard or certain plants and walkways. What do you suggest?
All too often we rely on a yard light that has a 100-watt bulb in it that almost blinds everyone. Really, the purpose of that light is to just illuminate that walkway, show people how to get there, not be so bright that it shines so much light that it's actually hard to see. So take a look at what you have for existing fixtures. Make sure that you have correct wattage bulbs in there that will work at night and that everyone can see. You can also install inexpensive low-voltage landscape lighting in a path form or using spots or whatever to light not just the pathway but the front of the house as well. It makes it very appealing at night. It adds a whole different dimension and a different look to your home.
The other thing, even is more in the daytime, is to make sure you get as much sunlight as you can. Sometimes we just cover things up and it almost has a dark feel to it. So it might be thinning out the tree or making sure things are pruned like they should. But I think light's a big thing. You walk into a business or a place like that, and all these big businesses now, it's just like bright as can be. And that's the thing. You walk into somewhere and it feels kind of dark, you just feel a little uncomfortable. We like light.
That's a very good point. You could have an existing home that has a lot of shade trees, very low canopies, very dense, things don't grow well. It kind of feels like you're entering the forbidden forest.
I get you.
And so if you can trim things up, let a little more light in, more plants will grow. People will feel more invited as they come. So that's a very good point, Tom.
Yeah, I like that idea. What about, okay, so we're going to work just with the landscaping right now, not the hardscaping, I think. Is that what you call the masonry and that? But the landscaping. Spacing, light, shade, all those things. What are some guidelines there as far as, do you want to go smaller? Do you want to go one color? Lots of colors, different heights? Symmetry? Where do you weigh in on that?
The interesting thing about that question is it's very broad. And everyone's home is different. Everyone's style is different. And that's why landscaping sometimes leaves people scratching their head. They're not really sure how to proceed because there's such a wealth of plants and different styles and types out there. It's hard to know where to put what. Often you need some advice. It's very simple these days to take a digital shot of your home, bring it into a garden center, get some advice from someone that is trained in this, and they can easily steer you to the right plants for your light setting and something that will enhance the front of your house. All too often people tend to choose plants that they particularly like themselves. And
it's easy to do that. You fall in love with a certain plant and you're like, oh.
But the front of the house should be neat, clean, maybe low maintenance, something that always looks good. If you decide to have a rose bed, a rose garden out front, and you have a season where the roses are having a terrible time, everything's struggling in that garden, which all gardeners go through at some time, then the entire front of the house looks a little bit worse for the wear. It's better maybe to go with more permanent plants that are easier to care for, and then use that experimentation, or you put that rose bed somewhere where you can enjoy it out a kitchen window or something out back.
Were you going to say?
Well, I think the other important thing too is to know what it's going to look like in 5 years. When you plant it today, and it might look a little thin, but if you get things too close together, all of a sudden in 5 years you're going to have two things growing on top of each other, and no matter how nice that plant is, that usually doesn't look good. We don't like things overtaking each other. So know that it's going to take a little time before it's the finished product.
So you're more of a fan of maybe going smaller or plant too?
You could go small, but you can use big plants, but just know that you have to leave space for them initially. So when you first plant that, you might go, boy, it looks like we don't have much out there.
Right.
But, things grow pretty fast.
Now, do you suggest getting the soil ready? I mean, doing something different, bringing in topsoil or peat moss or whatever you bring in, or do you just go with whatever's there already?
That's a case-by-case basis. We're blessed with black dirt here in farm-rich country, and so many homes are fortunate and they have fairly good soil. Others are not, depending on where the home was built or what was done as it was built and so on. So each area needs to be assessed, although there are plants that can grow in poor soils. So taking a look at the soil is important, but I think there's small amendments that can be done that will allow you to grow a number of different things.
Well, what about the, having minerals or in the soil to keep the water in and, aerate it?
You're speaking about maybe an additive that would help the moisture levels and so on. And there are those things. They're polymers that actually hold water. But we're usually fairly well blessed with moisture here. And so some watering is needed in July, August maybe, but not much.
Well, that brings me to my next question, is watering. Where we lived in Washington, many people had the underground sprinklers, and I didn't see that much around here. So do you recommend underground sprinklers if somebody's starting at the beginning? Or
when the plants are young is when they're going to need the most water. You need to get those roots to go deep. And usually here we like to water maybe less often, but deeper, so you get the water to go down farther, so those roots will follow that. So, watering a lot of the plants, shrubs, whatever, don't necessarily want to be watered every day. And they also want, if you can get, the more you can water right on them, the better. Sometimes the sprinklers just shoot things in the water, can end up wherever, especially we have a little wind around here sometimes in the summer, and that can be tough to get it right where you want it. So, yeah.
What about mulch? Do you suggest putting down the mulch, or maybe even those, the liner you can put down to keep the weeds from coming through?
Permanent shrubbery like evergreens or deciduous shrubs, spirea, potentilla, white chili, those kinds of plants work very well if you put some kind of underlayment. Landscape fabric is what you're speaking of, with mulch or rock over the top. It's very common to help hold the weeds down and reduce maintenance and so on. Perennial plants don't operate that well under those conditions because perennials die to the ground and come back from the root. So some of that choice of whether you're going to use an underlayment or not has to do with what you're planting and how many and so on. But it is a nice way to reduce labor and work on your part, and it can conserve moisture and help the plants that way.
Do you recommend putting in borders around the yard or walkways with the blocks, resealing the driveway to add curb appeal? Do you think that those are worthwhile?
I think it all depends on what the person likes. If you like to have that pathway you were talking earlier about kind of leading you to the right spot, well, a stone pathway can lead you if that's where you want people to head. That can work, but if you don't like all the concrete stuff, then that's probably not the thing for you.
What's the biggest mistake you think you see people make over and over again in your many years in the garden business?
Many years.
For me, I would say planting too many things too close together. That's why it's called a nursery, is that they're babies. And so they need space, just like Tom had mentioned. Planting things that did not work in a specific light condition is another big mistake. And they always say things like,
that mistake.
but I wanted that plant. Well, you might have wanted it, but it didn't work in that light setting. So you have to pay attention and get some advice when it comes to planting.
And maybe knowing how to take care of it too, knowing when it needs to be pruned, if it needs to be cut back, how much water it needs, just making sure that it gets, like you're talking about, the right care, especially in the first few years.
When's a good time to get a sale on plants? When's the best time to buy?
It's always best to buy them at full price.
Well, the main thing is health. Everybody loves a sale. Everybody wants a discount, but the truth of it is that if you do this correctly, you're done for many years. If you do it incorrectly, you're redoing it and redoing it and redoing it. So it's better to maybe make sure your plants are healthy, whether they're on sale or not. Sales come and go throughout the season, depending on what the season is and what the plant is that you're looking at. Annual flowers, for example, typically are on sale at this time of the year because we're getting a little later in the year. So there are bargains out there. You just have to hunt for them.
Mm-hmm. And know maybe why it's on sale. Is it something that, you know, is sick, like he's saying, or maybe doesn't do so well here, so they need to move it? You know, sometimes you can plant things late in the fall. It all depends on, we never know what kind of fall we're going to get, or spring or winter.
True.
So it's hard to say, boy, if you can wait till this time of the year and get it half price and plant it, you'll be great, because maybe get it half price and it doesn't come back.
Right.
It doesn't make it through the winter or something.
So if you timed it right, you could have something blooming all year round, or practically, well, not those,
Sure.
you know.
Well, yeah, not year round, but at least in the...
And
nice
that's the point, year-round. You need to make some effort to have seasonal interest, not just summertime. But since a good part of our year is very cold, it's nice to have something there that is going to give you some interest, whether it's an evergreen, a shrub that maybe would hold berries in the winter, or have interesting bark or
like
bark color,
dogwood, yeah.
a dogwood or something, yes. So you want to pay attention to all of our seasons. I've had many requests for people will say, well, I would like this, this, and this, and make sure that I can put Christmas lights on something. And so, you know, they're thinking ahead, and that's good.
And, you know, when you're planting too and thinking about winter, think of, you know, your ice melt, your ice salt that you're going to use. If you're going to plant some beautiful flowers here and then you're going to dump all the salt on it, you know, it's probably not going to be back next year, because salt will kill as much as anything.
Right.
So make sure that it's an area that you're not going to, you know, abuse in the wintertime and then expect it to look beautiful in the spring.
That's a great point, because most of these plants are going to be near this entry for curb appeal, and they're going to be close to a walkway that needs to be shoveled. Where does the snow go? Is there something in the snow that's going to hurt the plants? And so all of those things are something that you want to consider.
Do you have a favorite shade plant and a favorite full sun plant that just thrives in this area that maybe you could recommend it?
You know, my favorite probably plant, or actually more of a shrub, is would be more of a sun shrub, but it's the lilac bushes that we have around here. They're just so, you know, they can just be so full, and you can smell the fragrance from 3 houses away sometimes. And just a nice row of them. They don't last very long in the early spring. That's another nice thing I like, is, you know, spring is here. When we got the lilacs going, we should have good weather.
How about you? Do you have a favorite shade plant that's just kind of your go-to?
Well, it's got to be Hosta. Hosta is by far the most durable and dependable shade plant that I'm aware of.
Quite a few varieties, too, I've noticed.
Many varieties. They're introducing more all the time. And often people will say, oh, I have Hosta. But until you've used them and looked at the different varieties and maybe grouped them in masses and so on, I'm not sure that you can get good color in the shade in any other way other than maybe annual flowers that you have to plant every season. So,
what makes the biggest impact, do you think? Kind of more one color, or a variety of colors, or makes the biggest statement to you?
It's a little difficult, but I think, you know, when we plant things, we want to plant them in at least small groups, you know, 3, 5, something like that. If you plant one of this and one of this and one of this, it might look a little kind of irregular, and maybe like it doesn't match.
I think from a distance, if you don't mass plants together, it's visually confusing. Now, whether they're all the same color or not, in our area, we probably like to mix them up a little bit. Many people want color, lots of color. But grouping them in groups rather than one of this and one of that creates a more pleasing look from a distance. If you do want just individual plants rather than groups, it looks kind of weedy. It looks like you went to that sale at the nursery and bought one of everything available. So.
Okay. You just made me, I just thought of something I really wanted to say, and I don't remember. Oh,
maybe we could recap just a little bit about what people should do regarding assessing their home.
Okay.
Bring someone in, take a look at what your strong points are, look at the entire property. You can take the digital picture just for yourself. We all know that when you take a picture, things look different. even of your home. You may think you
True.
know it very well, but if you take it and look at it, you'll say, oh, I didn't realize this was so overgrown, or whatever. Look at that, your strong points, look at your weak points. Do you need a new sidewalk? Are there little trippers? Are there things that could be dangerous for people when they're approaching, and so on? And
that's a good one, the danger one, you know. You want it to be as safe.
You want it to be as safe as possible, and you want it to be comfortable. Many houses built in the 50s have a 2.5-foot sidewalk. You can't walk side by side with someone else. You have to walk in a goat path fashion. So you need to kind of look at that in a logical fashion. Whether you're going to sell your house or not, curb appeal is very important.
Okay, did you have
Well,
final
and even, you know,
tip
what
for
do I like? What's my favorite part? You know, maybe you have a particular flower or bush that was maybe passed down from a family member, and you really want to kind of highlight that. So, you know, just kind of see what you can do to bring out maybe what you already have that you really like. Or if there's an area that you really don't like, you know, either shy away from that or do something to fix that area up.
Okay, good. All right, well, we're just about out of time, fellas. I really appreciate you coming by. I've gotten some good tips, and hopefully our listeners have learned a few pointers. And come back and join us again. And thanks for giving us the scoop on basic gardening. Thank you for joining us. And remember, for more information, log on to ksmq.org and click on on Garden Connections. There you can find past episodes, read the blogs, where you can submit your ideas. Now that your garden is on its way, tune in next week and we'll share more tips and talk shop about what's on your mind and in your garden. For everyone at Garden Connections, I'm Vicki Langrell. See you next time.